Okay, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining us here tonight. It's such a critical moment for us to be gathering together. It's such an important moment for us to be raising our voices in solidarity with the Palestinian people and their struggle for justice and their struggle for liberation from the brutality of Israel's occupation and apartheid rule. Here at the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and in our broader movement, we're constantly humbled and inspired by the strength of the Palestinian people who continue to demand freedom and justice, who continue in the struggle for self-determination against such incredible odds. The systematic violence and oppression they're subjected to, which is now reaching a very palpable intensification. And some of you will have seen that even just today, there was a massive Israeli military attack in occupied Jenin, which is continuing in this horrific trend. Israel, of course, has just elected a few months ago the most far-right, ultra-nationalist government in its history, with government ministers who are self-described proud fascists, in intensifying the brutality of the enforcement of a system of apartheid over all Palestinians. In 2022, Israeli forces killed more Palestinians in the West Bank than in any year since 2005. And this spate of killings has continued into this year, into 2023, with horrendous assaults in occupied Jenin and Nablus, strikes on the Gaza Strip, and in the last week, Israeli forces enabling settlers to mount a barbaric assault on the village of Huwara, which saw homes set alight and civilians attacked. In the aftermath of that grotesque settler attack, Bezalel Smotrich, who's a minister in the Israeli government, called for the state to erase the village. So we're gathering here tonight to first and foremost hear from our Palestinian guest speakers about the ongoing resistance to these settler and military attacks, and also to hear from key voices in the UK on how we need to respond in a moment, in an intensified moment like we're in now. So I'm going to turn first to hear from our speakers from Palestine, and we're very lucky and grateful to have with us tonight Jalal Abu Khater, a Palestinian writer and activist from Jerusalem. Jalal holds an MA in politics and international relations from the University of Dundee and is a frequent commentator on social media and also in writing as well. So we're very grateful to have you with us to speak tonight, Jalal.
Thank you, Rivka. Thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be speaking with this group tonight. Of course, I thank you all for your solidarity, for your support, sympathy, even those who are curious of what's really going on. In my 28 years of life, I don't think I've ever felt more alarmed at how dire the situation has become as I'm feeling today. It's only been getting worse and worse and worse every year. And there's only perhaps one main thing to blame. It's the environment of impunity that Israel enjoys as it commits repeatedly grave violations of international humanitarian law, grave violations of the Geneva Convention, war crimes, and the fact that they continue to get away with criminal acts without any consequence, the fact that they keep getting normalized across mostly by Western nations, the fact that they continue to do business as usual as they oppress and solidify and entrench the system of apartheid in Palestine. It's really worrying because on the ground, the developments are trending towards a worse direction, and it's a very natural direction for this for such events to take. We are now facing one of the most extreme right-wing governments in our history, and it's basically because settlers, literal settlers, who used to run down to villages and burn mosques, attack homes and attack Palestinians in their homes. The ones who initiated those violent raids on Palestinians, the ones who have murdered worshippers in Hebron 25 years ago, the same settlers who are responsible for the most extreme violence are now the government of Israel. In the past, the governments would consist of those who are accepting the settler movement, accepting the violence and letting it happen in impunity. But today those settlers are the government and they are the ones setting the laws. I've been on the ground in Nablus, I've been into Huwara just a few days ago. I participate in the olive harvest every year. This past year, actually, I got injured at the end of the olive harvest during a settler attack. I was in Jibia near Ramallah. Armed settlers harassed the farmers and harassed us. I suspected that settlers were coming to attack, to damage our cars, and that's when I got injured myself. So every single Palestinian who goes out to hike, to farm their land, to utilize whatever space they've got around them in the West Bank, they're facing this kind of violence, and it's continuing with impunity. It's because the Israeli government allows it. It's because this kind of violence is this Israeli state business, as Bezalel has reported in the past. This is how Israel sustains its occupation, it sustains its settler enterprise, and it continues to steal more land and take more. What happened in Huwara just last week is not, it's not a loss of control. It's not settlers like suddenly becoming violent. I think Bezalel put it best. Bezalel were describing it as a synergy. The settlers would go on and commit the act, the war crime, the mob violence, the burning of people in their homes, or the shooting, targeting people, like what happened with Samh al-Aqtash, a medic who was killed in Zatara. The settlers would commit those grave acts. The military would be around them to secure this act and to make sure that the settlers are not impeded. The military is there, as I've witnessed before, to protect the settlers, and they would not hesitate to use their arms against any Palestinian who even dares to resist. So the settlers commit the heinous acts, the military secures the act, and then the politicians would defend those acts, or would claim it's just part of some conflict in the West Bank. The politicians legitimize the acts, and they're all working together, and it's synergy. It's not settlers alone who are committing those violent pogroms and attacking Palestinians. It is the state of Israel that is allowing this to happen. Settlement expansion is increasing at a huge, like unprecedented scale. It's because the Israeli government provides those extremist settlers, even when they are living in illegal outposts, they provide them with facilities, with water, with protection, with electricity, with roads. And at the same time, they target the Israeli state, the settlers, and the military. They all target any Palestinian presence in Area C of the West Bank, which is over 60%. They target any Palestinian who dares to expand or build upon in their homes even. They want us, the strategy is they want us confined within a very small, tiny parts of the West Bank, what they describe as Area A, which is less than 20% of the occupied West Bank. They want us to remain in those ghettos, behind walls, behind fences, and they want us to just die off in those really, what they're turning to be slums. They're turning to be ghettos, and they're turning to be the worst of the worst of our living. So people like me and many other Palestinians are seeing in real time how we're losing access to all our land. Not only are many Palestinians in the West Bank unable to go to Jaffa to see their homes across into what's now Israel, to travel to visit family in different parts of the country, but they're losing access even within the West Bank, and they're not able to travel freely in the West Bank because the checkpoints and the killings and the continued violence is only increasing. I think that the only reason this is happening is because no one has really put Israel to account for all it's been doing. The settlement enterprise is growing. The Israeli government supports it fully, but at the same time, no settler is facing prosecution for assaulting or attacking or committing a pogrom against Palestinians. Yesterday, I shared a video of a settler using a hatchet, an axe, to attack a Palestinian family in a car in Huwara. Multiple settlers are attacking, but this one settler with an axe, his face was obviously visible, and it's on CCTV camera. A 2-year-old girl was in the car. She was pepper sprayed. The family were all injured and hospitalized later on. This is an attempted lynching attempt, but you didn't hear about any arrested settler. Another known settler even shot towards the car, but the soldiers came, secured the settlers, and just kept the Palestinians at bay, and no settler was arrested following this attempted lynching that was caught on camera. The faces are there. But at the same time, I'm sure you remember just a few weeks ago, a Palestinian fighter attempted to shoot towards an Israeli settlement near Jericho. I think the gun malfunctioned, only one shot was fired. The entire city of Jericho was put under a blockade for almost 2 weeks. The entire city of Jericho was blockaded from all sides. People couldn't go in or out. Traveling outside of Palestine is only possible through Jericho, for example. So it put everyone's life in trouble. And when they raided the Jericho refugee camp, it's called Aqab al-Jabal refugee camp, the Israeli military killed 5 people. They slaughtered 5 people. And it happened again just last week in Aqab al-Jabal. A similar case. They came in, they killed 1 person because they denied them treatment, and they injured many. They didn't reach their target, but they're willing to put so much force and violence to suppress any kind of Palestinian resistance, while at the same time, they're willingly allowing settler violence to continue unimpeded. In Huwara and all over the West Bank, in Burin and all over the West Bank, it's continuing unimpeded, and that's why I think it's a very dangerous situation. We have no one to defend us. We have no one to face off this violence and stop those settlers. And really, that's why it's I don't think it's ever been scarier than this. It's ever been scarier. There's no one to stand up for the Palestinians. Is this true? Are we really that alone? We're resisting with our hands and with the rocks and the sticks we have. Anyone who carries a gun is shot and killed. That is a matter of policy now. Anyone who resists is harassed or killed or arrested. And there's really no one standing up for the Palestinians physically on the ground. The people who are afraid to go out and travel in their cars or to go to their land to plant their trees, who is willing to defend them and provide them with protection? This is what we're facing today, and it's really getting dire because of the environment of impunity that Israel enjoys. As long as they're not held accountable, this is going to continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jalal. Thank you for your clarity and for that horrific accounts of what you've told us. And I think what you said really underlines the importance of solidarity and that push for accountability. You know, part of that environment of impunity that you spoke about is also enabled by the British government and by British companies that are not only involved in this violence, but are profiting from it in the meantime. So solidarity to you, Jalal, and please, for everyone who's here, in the meantime, during this event, we'll be putting some notes in the chat about what you can do to get involved so we can do things like force the accountability that is so needed in this moment. I'm going to turn next to our next speaker from Palestine. We're very honored to have with us Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, who's a Palestinian physician, activist, and Secretary General and co-founder of Al-Mubadara, which is the Palestinian National Initiative. Dr. Barghouti, you're very, very welcome, and we're very honored to have you here today.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Jalal, for the very detailed description of the situation. I think Jalal gave you a thorough picture of what people suffer from. I want to add that today we witnessed the 4th massacre since the beginning of this year by the Israeli army. 6 people were killed, but 26 are seriously injured. The number of people killed could increase. That brings the total number of Palestinians killed by the Israeli army from the beginning of the year to 70, including 14 young children and 4 women. And this is the result of the behavior not only of this Israeli government, but also of the previous governments. But what we see today with this new Israeli government is an unprecedented alliance between the extreme nationalist Zionist trend in Israel with the rising Jewish fundamentalist extremism. And the result is that you have fascists sitting there in this Israeli government, including Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. And just imagine the fact that Ben-Gvir was not allowed to serve in the Israeli army when he was 18 years old because of his extremism and because of the fact that he belonged Tukah Kahana movement, which was classified as a terrorist group, even in Israel and the United States. And this same person is now the Minister of Internal Security, in charge of everything that relates to Palestinian people, including police, border police, including what happens in the Aqsa Mosque, including what happens in prisons where almost 5,000 Palestinian prisoners are kept. And then he's aided by Smotrich, who is even more extreme, who's not only the Minister of Finance in Israel, supplying all the necessary funding for settlement expansion, but also he's a minister in the Ministry of Defense, and they allocated to him the responsibility for the West Bank, which means he's the true military governor of Palestine, of the West Bank. And handing over the responsibility for what the settlers in the West Bank to him means the practical step towards actual annexation of the West Bank. The declared program of this government is very clear. It's annexation of the West Bank, continuation of unprecedented level of settlement expansion, including declaring for the first time in decades the establishment of 13 new illegal settlements. Their plan that is declared is that Palestine, the whole of Palestine, which they call Eretz Israel, is exclusive for Jewish people, and the right of self-determination in Palestine is only exclusive for Jewish people, and the consolidation of the system of apartheid, of course, against Palestinians. But in addition to that, this government is conducting fascist actions, including house demolitions at an unprecedented rate. Just for your knowledge, there are 10,000 houses in Jerusalem alone that are threatened to be demolished. They also just passed in the first reading the death sentence against Palestinians who are accused of resistance. They've just passed in the Israeli Knesset, with the support of the Israeli opposition, a law to take away citizenship from Palestinians living in Jerusalem or in Israel itself. And the attack on Huwara was very indicative of the kind of behavior of these people, the settlers who are truly governing Israel today, with 15 members in the Knesset. And both Ben-Gvir and Smotrich are themselves settlers, one living in Kiryat Arba settlement and the other one in Kadumim. What we see here is an advocacy of Jewish supremacy. Clearly, that's what they say, and that's what they do. And that all indicates the nature of this government that we are facing. And let me here be clear. Don't think that those who are in opposition to this fascist government, like Lapid or Gantz, are very different from it. On the contrary, these guys were responsible for what you've just mentioned, killing 224 Palestinians in 2022, the highest number since 2005, that's true. They are themselves were responsible for an also unprecedented level of expansion of settlements. They don't differ with Netanyahu or with these fascists about Judaization of the West Bank and of the rest of Palestine. They are following the same policy. And here I want to clarify that what we face here is not only these fascists, but the whole Zionist movement, which moved in the direction of fascism. And that's why you could not find any Zionist party standing against, for instance, this law of taking away citizenship from Palestinians. That leads me to the main conclusion here, and that is what should be done in this situation. Besides, of course, demanding protection for Palestinians, as Jalal said. But what we need really is a strong, forceful, powerful movement to enforce sanctions and boycott on the Israeli government. Not just this government, but anybody that continues these policies. What we need is a strong movement to impose sanctions and boycott on the system of apartheid, on the system of occupation, and on anybody that practices and continues to practice these horrible things against the Palestinian people. I do believe that we have an unprecedented opportunity today to expose the whole policy of Israel, to expose the whole policy of this extreme Zionist movement, and to put them into, and to hold them accountable for what is happening. There is a great opportunity today because of the behavior of the fascists to expose what has happened also in 1948 when massacres were committed against Palestinians. When Smotrich spoke about erasing Huwara, he was practically repeating and remembering the fact that the Zionist groups in 1948 erased 530 Palestinian communities and villages. So I think there is a great opportunity here, and the way to go forward is to demand BDS and to enforce BDS and to prevent the British government from passing a law in the parliament against BDS. There is a great opportunity here, and we need your help, but also there is a great opportunity to expose the practices that are done by the Israeli government and inform the British public and British policymakers. And when doing so, it is very important to remind these politicians of the responsibility of the British government when it passed Balfour Declaration and when it created this huge problem here in Palestine. I want finally to assure you that nothing of what they're doing will break our will or break our insistence on continuing our struggle. They will not break us, believe me. And in the place of any Palestinian that is killed, there are hundreds of other Palestinians who come to struggle. We have a fantastic younger Palestinian generation that is not deceived by all these talks about negotiations and about waiting for the United States to change the situation. Actually, what we see today in Palestine is going back to the same principles that governed the first Intifada: self-reliance, self-organizations, and defiance of the oppression that we are subjected to. I thank you all for your solidarity, and I hope we can move together in creating the largest possible boycott, divestment, sanctions movement against this injustice.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mustafa. It's so important for us to hear from you, someone who's been in this struggle for such a long time and has given us so much important words here. I'm glad that you mentioned the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. That's one of the clearest tools that we have in this country, both to support the Palestinian people so they can conduct their struggle, but also to call to account the British companies that are involved in the horrible violence against Palestinians. And you mentioned that the British government is now planning to table a bill to try to prevent us from using boycott, divestment, and sanction tactics. Of course, the first thing to say is that we won't stop using those tactics. We'll grow the BDS movement even larger if and when the British government tries to crack down on us. But it's really important for us to push back against those attempts to keep us from exercising our solidarity. So we do have a day coming up on March 22nd. We're going to be in Parliament pushing all of our MPs, raising our voice for Palestine, and convincing the MPs not to support this bill, to vote against it when it's tabled. And there's details about that lobby day. We need everybody on board for that. Details of that are in the chat. Thanks again so much to both of our speakers from Palestine. It's so important, I think, for us to ground our response here in what we're hearing directly from such important people that we're hearing from in Palestine. So thanks again to both of you. I'm going to turn now to our comrades, activists, social movement leaders here in the UK. I'm going to go first to Louise Atkinson, who's the current president of the National Education Union, which is one of the 15 national unions affiliated to the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. So thanks to the NEU for that. And also, Louise is also a teacher from Carlisle and has recently been in Palestine with a delegation from the NEU. So Louise, over to you.
Thanks very much, and thank you for having us along to speak this evening. It's a really, really important event. And I think I'll start by saying the National Education Union stand in full solidarity with Palestinians, and in particular we have strong links with the GUPT out there, and we send 2 delegations of our members out every single year, not COVID years, but most years we send out 2 delegations. I initially went in February 2020 and then went again on a recent delegation in October last year. And we believe as an education union that it's, you know, defending human rights, including trade union rights, should be a global endeavour. But I think particularly our delegations are so important because we take educators from all over England, Wales and Northern Ireland to go and to witness firsthand the shocking and awful yet regular infringements on human rights that are going on out there, and also to build relationships with our brothers and sisters out there. And these delegations not only inform and educate the people that take part in the delegation, but it does empower them to return and share what they've seen and to speak out. And, you know, as we've already mentioned, I think it's more important than ever that we're speaking out now, that we are solid and we are speaking out and we are speaking loudly about what's going on out there. And when I think back to my experiences, you know, words like fear and pressure and oppression, you know, they come to mind, but I think it's really important that I was only there for a very, very short amount of time, experiencing a very, very small amount of it. And, you know, it was very, very difficult. Things like seeing gas canisters thrown into children's playgrounds. You know, we went and visited a refugee camp one day, and we had a couple of people on our delegation had particular allergies, and they started coughing and they were struggling to breathe. And then we found out, you know, after we'd been there an hour or so, that there'd been a gas attack in that camp a couple of days previous. And, you know, this is people's lives. This is where people are living. It's absolutely unacceptable. And then, you know, visiting schools and speaking to children and experience checkpoints that children go through, passing heavily armed forces every single day, and talking to those children about how that feels, about how they feel going to and from school. No child should have to experience that. And sitting and listening to people's first-hand accounts of watching people that have been murdered in front of them, or their experiences of solitary confinement, those will never, ever, ever leave me. And when I first went in 2020, I was left with this huge question in my mind, like, how has the world allowed these atrocities to go on for so long? Why has the world just allowed this to go on? And when I came back then, I started to hear more voices and more people speaking out. And I'll be really honest, you know, I think I started to become a little bit more hopeful that people are starting to listen and that we would see some change. But then going back in October, you know, Jalal said it far, far better than I could say it. I could feel, even though I was just there for that week, I could feel the difference in that couple of years. And I witnessed many, many more provocations. It felt much more tense. So while I do think the world is starting to listen, I think this is when we need to be louder in our solidarity, and we need to be really, really standing alongside our Palestinian brothers and sisters and helping to amplify their voices right at this point now. So, you know, we've already mentioned around BDS, that's really important that we do get involved in that, and also really, really important that we get in touch with our government and voice our concerns about their bill that they're trying to put in around anti-boycotting. But get in touch with government directly as well, get in touch with your local MPs, put pressure on our government in the UK to take action against the Israeli government when they are in breach of human rights and international law. And then I'll just highlight as well, you know, you've got the national protests on the 13th of May. Obviously, the National Education Union are affiliated to PSC, and we're looking to put a really, really big NEU block in that march on the 13th of May. But, you know, people are starting to listen, but we need to be louder because we can't allow this to go on for any longer. So thanks very much for having us along this evening, and I'm really looking forward to hearing everyone else's contributions as well.
Thank you so much, Louise. It's just brilliant to have the NEU along, and you especially, to be so steadfast in your solidarity for the Palestinian people. And please do, thank you for mentioning the demonstration that we're having to commemorate the Nakba. That's in May. You can see the details about it in the chat. Of course, the NEU is supporting that demonstration, and it's so important for us to show our strength in the streets. I'm going to turn next to John McDonnell, who I think we can see is doing the important work that he does in Parliament. John McDonnell is the Labour Party MP for Hayes and Harlington and a long-time supporter of justice for the Palestinian people. So John, I'll turn to you.
Thank you. As you see, I'm in the House of Commons. We're in the middle of the votes against the Public Order Bill, which is the bill attacking civil liberties, the right to demonstrate. So when the division bells go, I'll have to leave. So I'll be incredibly brief. I just want to reiterate what others have said. I believe this is an incredibly dangerous situation. The election of a right-wing government, an authoritarian government, and people going into government, which nobody ever thought would be allowed in a civilized society. That's how serious this is. And we've seen the results. They're self-evident already. The physical attacks, the assaults and the murders, described as a pogrom with regard to what's happening in the settlements. The threat to basic civil liberties, human rights, democratic institutions, even the threat to the judiciary in Israel itself. For above all else, the undermining of peace and the undermining of the right of Palestinian people to self-determination in the future. This Netanyahu government is acting exactly as has been said, out of control, acting with impunity. It sees no consequences for the actions it's undertaking. So what can we do? Very briefly, because I have to go and vote. We do what this country has done when regimes are out of control and abusing human rights, and what we've campaigned for. Of course, we condemn them, of course we do, and we need more condemnation from all the political parties in this country of what's going on. Secondly, we seek to isolate them diplomatically. In every institution, global institution, we should be seeking to isolate this government now for its actions. But I agree, we need actions, not words. And again, what have we done, the UK in the past, to take action? Sanctions. And so therefore, this is why boycott, disinvestment and sanctions are becoming increasingly relevant today, in a way, in some ways, more than ever before. And I tell you just one example of a sanction that we can introduce, which is banning the export of JCB equipment, which is being used to demolish the homes of Palestinians and crush them as well. Just one action could send a message right the way across the economy in that respect. We know now that the government is bringing forward this legislation. We haven't seen the draft bill yet, but we're expecting it any day now to ban BDS. That is an attack on civil liberties, but it's an attack on freedom of speech, and it will permeate our society. You know the way that they introduce legislation and then extend its remits and powers. So this is very fundamental to our basic civil liberties and human rights in this country. That's why we've got to oppose. And we've got to oppose it in every form we possibly can. We'll oppose it in Parliament. We need to demonstrate. We need to get the message out there through our trade unions. The whole the labour and trade union movement should be mobilised now, as well as civil society organisations. I say this finally because I've got to go and vote. There's one other thing that we can do as well, particularly from the Labour Party and the trade union movement. We can recommit and confirm that when Labour gets elected, as is likely in the next general election, when Labour gets elected, we can reconfirm its commitment that on day one, we recognise the state of Palestine. We give that recognition immediately. And we recognise the rights of Palestinian people to self-determination. In that way, not only are we opposing BDS bans, what we're trying to do as well, oppose the legislation, but also demonstrate whose side we're on in this. And we're on the side of all those who want peace. We're all those on the side who respect the right to self-determination, civil liberties, and human rights. solidarity, I have to go and vote against this appalling piece of legislation.
Thank you very much, John. Very appreciated, and absolutely. This anti-boycott law that a few people have mentioned is a part of a broader suite of repressive legislation that this government is introducing, focused on trying to roll back the trade unions' power, trying to roll back our right to protest and our right to boycott. And that's why it's so important that we come together to oppose this repressive legislation. And exactly as John mentioned, I mean, it's not just the British government. We have to hold the British government to account over its continuing support for the Israel's apartheid regime, but it's also British companies like JCB whose equipment is used in the destruction, the demolition of Palestinian homes. There are other companies, British companies like Barclays Bank, which is invested in and providing loans and other financial services to companies that are selling weapons to the Israeli state. We have a Barclays National Day of Action coming up for people to take this energy to the streets, really, and to push back against those British companies that are involved in this horrible violence. So thanks again for those words from John McDonnell MP. And I'm going to turn next to another trade union, great trade union partner of ours, Gail Cartmill, who's currently the executive head of operations at Unite the Union, which is also a national union affiliated to the PSC. Gail is also the former TUC president and now a member of the TUC executive committee. So great to hear from you, Gail.
And thank you very, very much indeed. But I want to make a practical point at the very beginning, which is to thank the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and to call on any of you who aren't already affiliates, if you're a member of a trade union, to ask your trade union branch, your trade union union, trade union region, and all the organisation within your organisations to affiliate to the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. They cannot carry forward their work without financing and without your support and solidarity. So please do that. I'd also like to thank Jalal for the very real description of life on the ground. Extremely moving, Jalal, and thank you. But Dr. Mustafa, you reminded us of the spirit of the first Intifada. And it was brilliant to hear reference to the spirit of the first Intifada and the self-determination and self-organisation of the Palestinian people who ran a society underneath the occupation. And the fact that you mentioned that today makes me feel in my heart that's possible again, to harness the strength and determination of the Palestinian societies. My own union, Unites, for decades acted in solidarity with the Palestinians. We do our best, it's never enough, and we'll continue to stand alongside you because we know the situation on the ground is getting more and more desperate. We've heard about that from you both, and we see it increasing day by day. I miss the events of today because I've been in meetings, and to hear the last outrage is just dreadful, and I'm sure that everybody agrees with that. And you said that, yes, of course, the new Israeli government is the most right wing in the country's history. Who could think that the Kak Kahan party could be ever in government? But they are. But it is important to acknowledge that this is building on the policies of the past. This is a continuation of the denial of the Palestinian people's inalienable rights to self-determination within secure borders. And as every settlement has been built over the decades of watching that illegal activity, it's been one policy laid upon another that has led us into the disaster that is today. I suppose we could say, I'm interested in knowing if you agree with this, that the difference appears to be that they're very much more open about what outcomes they want. And As has already been said, the response by the international community, many politicians, and in particular, here we are in the UK, we must call it out, our own UK government is one of deafening silence. And there is still no concerted international effort to address the injustices and brutality that's being meted out on a daily basis by the Israeli state. And that's why, as others have said, it is so important that civil society in the UK stands by the Palestinians and challenges the lack of political response to the situation. Trade unions in the UK are the biggest civil society organisation, and we replicate that across the globe. So through the global union federations, we are a force. And therefore, we have a duty to demand in the UK and internationally that governments take actions so that the Israeli government now is called to account for their breach of human rights and international law. And of course, Unite, along with the TEC, supports the peaceful campaigning of the BDS movement, as called for by you in Palestinian civil society, just as we supported the BDS against apartheid in South Africa. And we're a part of the wider civil society campaign against the proposed legislation, outrageously seeking to outlaw BDS activities by public institutions. We know that this is a part of a wider attack on our civil liberties. Unite the Union will be mobilising to support the activities of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign on March the 22nd and on the 13th of May. And again, just to appeal to everybody, please support PSC. It's been a privilege this evening to hear Palestinian voices and reiterate that we stand strong with you in your struggle against apartheid, as we have stood with oppressed people around the world throughout the history of our trade union. Thank you very much for your contribution, and thank you, PCS, for organising this evening.
Thank you so much, Gail. It's so significant to hear from you, as always, and from all of our trade union partners. And just as a reminder, to echo something that Gail mentioned, Unite and NEU, who we heard from earlier, are both sponsoring, co-sponsors of our rally to commemorate the Nakba, May 13th. The details are in the chat. It's so important that we show all of the people of Palestine all over the world and everybody here in this country, how many people in this country are ready to support and stand strong with the Palestinian people and the struggle for self-determination. So thank you again, Gail. I'm going to turn next to Ronan Burtonshaw, who is the editor of Tribune, which is one of Britain's oldest socialist publications, definitely one worth reading as often as possible. Ronan is also the national coordinator of the Enough is Enough campaign. Ronan, over to you.
Thanks very much, Rivka. It is interesting, difficult, but a privilege to be asked to speak here at an event for the 75th anniversary of the Nakba. It's important, I think, when we talk about anniversaries of the Nakba, that we remember that it isn't something that stopped. It isn't something where a full stop was placed to it all those years ago, but it's something that continues and has continued every day, every week, every month, and every year since. We are talking now about a situation in Palestine, which, as Jalal pointed out, is the bloodiest in 20 years. Where roughly a Palestinian is killed a day since the start of 2023, where there's 3 settler attacks a day since the start of this year. Today we had the events in Jenin, and just before that, we were talking about what happened in Huwara. That in turn, most of the media, when they were talking about those events, talked about them as if they all happened just in a couple of days in Huwara. Actually, it wasn't true. That had been itself prompted by the murder of 11 Palestinians just days beforehand in Nablus by the Israeli occupation forces. Of course, the commander of the Israeli occupation forces in the West Bank talked about Huwara as a pogrom and was willing to use that word. I think it's very important that we use those words. And I think it's important that we remember the context and the history in which all of these things are happening. Bezalel Smotrich, as has already been mentioned by Mustafa earlier in this discussion, was also happy to talk about the need to wipe out Huwara, language that isn't something that is new. It was presented, I think, by much of the media as if it was new language, but it isn't. And it refers all the way back 75 years ago to when over 500 Palestinian towns and villages were wiped out. It is not something that is theoretical. It's not something we should look at as rhetorical. It's something that is happening in practice and that is a deep history. Of course, when we look at these things, we discuss the British context very often. The impending BDS bill has been mentioned here, and of course we can expect the Tory government, with its collection of attacks on our other civil rights and its reactionary positions when it comes to foreign policy, to introduce measures like that. I think I should be someone on the call who makes reference to the broader context here, which doesn't only include the Tories, but which includes the Labour Party, a party which I remember and which Tribune has been affiliated with since 1937 in a variety of ways, because it isn't just the Tories who are taking disastrous positions now on what's happening in Palestine as the situation intensifies and as people are being murdered on a daily basis. It is the Labour Party as well. And that was brought forward when Kim Johnson was censored for her heresy of saying that the Israeli government is an apartheid government and is a far-right government. In doing that, the Labour Party, under Keir Starmer's leadership, placed itself to the right of not just the broader progressive political sphere, but the world's major human rights institutions. Amnesty International, which referred to the Israeli government and the Israeli state as an apartheid regime, Human Rights Watch, Bezalel, and of course the mainstream of South African society, its civil society, its major political parties, its trade unions, the people who have the greatest experience and understanding of what apartheid is. We have, I'm afraid, in Keir Starmer, a human rights lawyer who is against human rights and against international law. And when we say that it is offensive that you describe an Israeli government as far right, I think it's worth pointing out, and worth mentioning that to the Israeli government itself, that they should maybe stop using those words to describe their own politics, their own parties, and their own activities. When we talk about Bezalel Smotrich, who wants to wipe out Huwara, well, he has used the word fascist proudly to describe himself on previous occasions. Itamar Ben-Gvir, who was also mentioned by Mustafa, also represents a tradition of fascist politics. That term has happily sat within his description of the politics he represents, most notably when he put on the wall of his office a portrait of Barak Goldstein, a fascist terrorist who murdered 27 Palestinians in Hebron in the 90s. And it isn't just this new government, and we have to say that. We have to make sure we're not getting caught in this narrative that the new government is terrible, but if we just replace them with the old status quo, it'll be fine for the Palestinians. Ayelet Shaked, who sat happily in the last moderate government, was elected off the back of a political campaign where she had an advert with perfume and the bottle was marked with the word fascism that she sprayed on herself. They're not hiding it. This is not something that is, under the rug anymore. This is something that is out there, that is being openly said, and we have to be able to say it. And the fact you can't, as a Labour Party MP, is a disgrace to that party, and it's a disgrace to progressive politics, and I'm afraid puts us in a very, very bad position for whatever comes down the road with this new Labour Party government. When we are talking about what's happening with Israeli politics, obviously there are these protests that are going on against the new government, and to some extent on the outside, we can sympathise with aspects of what they say when they're talking about defending people's civil liberties, and when they're talking about stopping this attack on the Supreme Court and the anti-democratic authoritarian moves. But we got to also remember what they don't say, and when they don't talk about the solidarity with Huwara, when they don't talk about the occupation, when they are defending a status quo which is quite happy to allow last year under the so-called moderate government over 200 Palestinians to be killed in that country, the ongoing dispossession of the Palestinians, the seizure of their land, the apartheid policies, and that is all fine. But what we have a problem with now is the kind of authoritarianism of this government only today. That will never be a solution to what's happening on the ground, I'm afraid. And it's something we have to be pretty clear about. Bezalel, in response to the events in Huwara, said this isn't a loss of control. This is what Israeli control looks like. The settlers carry out an attack, the military secures it, and politicians support it. This is a single system. This is not something where we can expect the opposition to come from within the apartheid regime. Very much like South Africa, the only solution that we have is international isolation. Between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea, there is one territory. There is in reality one government. And there's one set of law for one people and other sets of law for others. That situation won't be dealt with by forces within Israel. It can only be dealt with by building a mass movement that begins with supporting organizations like the PSC. It begins with supporting events like the protests on May 13th, and in building a mass movement to defend our own civil rights here, yes, but also to fight for Palestinians and our right to engage in the movement for boycott, divestment and sanctions. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ronan. And obviously, we've spoken a little bit today about the sort of media blackout on reporting what's happening in Palestine. And thanks to Tribune for always actually cutting through that and giving voice to Palestinians and those in the solidarity movement. So that's much appreciated. I'm going to turn next to Jess Barnard, our next speaker, a wonderful speaker and comrade, the former chair of Young Labour and currently a member of Labour Party's NEC. Jess, I'll turn over to you then.
Thank you, Rivka. And I just want to say I'm so grateful to be a part of the event tonight, to be speaking as part of such an important panel at such a crucial moment for the Palestinian people. So thanks again to PSC for always organising and creating these essential spaces. I want to start by just saying a brief few words about a recent delegation I was part of to Palestine. I was fortunate enough to be a part of, and I want to also thank the Palestinians who hosted us, who amongst all of this welcomed us into their homes, who shared their stories with us, and who continue to demonstrate incredible strength and openness towards strangers to share these stories, when so frequently throughout history we have continued to fail them. And as part of this delegation, it would be no surprise, and to chime with some of the things that have been said earlier today, we witnessed for our own eyes the systematic oppression that is experienced at every level and deeply entrenched racism towards Palestinians, and from accessing basic healthcare to hearing about contractual rights at work, being free to visit their family members or go to school or open up their shop or have a successful business. Palestinians are being denied fundamental rights under apartheid. And we saw the scale of the growth of the illegal settlements onto Palestinian lands, and witnessed how entire communities had water supplies redirected away from their homes and their crops and instead directed towards illegal settlements. So when we passed through checkpoint after checkpoint, it was so stark to see the inequality, witnessing Palestinians held up for hours and hours and hours on their way to school or work, being harassed, being searched, often being held at gunpoint, and facing really intimidating behavior by the Israeli military. We heard from students, young students, talking about their experiences of injustice in the education system and how they're denied the right to speak their own language, to talk about their oppression in their studies, and how they face almost constant discrimination in their education. And shop owners told us about facing random curfews, the violence and raids like the ones that we've seen over the past couple of weeks, designed to intimidate them and to break their resolve. And one of the things that really sat with me was when we saw, for our own eyes, we saw and visited a young family who were resisting the demolition of their village, and the IDF arrived while we were there, who turned immediately and began intimidating young children, toddlers, extremely young children, and following them them round and watching over us with their guns as their older sibling talked to us about the experience and what they were doing to raise awareness of their struggle. And so we've heard a lot about the new Israeli government that's come to power, and it's absolutely no surprise that this is an extremely dangerous time for Palestinians as they're permitting this settler violence to grow completely unchallenged and using the full force of the Israeli military and the judicial system to protect those responsible for those attacks. And the illegal settlements, as they continue to grow, and the demolishing of the homes of Palestinians and infringement of those rights are growing at an alarming rate. And you've heard from Palestinians themselves tonight about the reality of that on the ground. And so I just want to finish by saying a few words about our role as activists in the UK. And I know we've heard a little bit about today, but I want to just touch on this. As activists who stand with the Palestinian people internationally, it's so important that we rally vocally behind Palestinians and demonstrate just an ounce of the bravery that they demonstrate every single day. And not just to share and raise awareness, but to push back on some of the things that we've seen, you know, to proactively challenge the narrative that's been created that the lives of Palestinians are somehow up for debate, and the attempts to deny Palestinians the right to describe their own oppression, and a refusal to acknowledge the reports we've talked about tonight by Human Rights Watch, by Bezalel, by Amnesty and the UN, all describing this as a system of apartheid. So it's really, really essential that we join organisations like Palestine Solidarity Campaign, become proactive in those campaigns, challenge our elected representatives and demand that liberation for the Palestinian people. And not only, you know, to defend BDS within our legislation, but to demand implementations of sanctions against the Israeli government to end our arms sales to Israel as well. And while there are a handful of Labour MPs who are standing on the right side of history, and it's good to hear from John McDonnell tonight, there are far too many who remain silent on this brutal injustice. And the Labour leadership has created enormous harm by attempting to clamp down on Palestinian solidarity within our own party. And we have to remind him that one man does not make the whole Labour Party. The Labour movement has a proud history of international solidarity, and he cannot erase that. And a couple of years ago, I was extremely privileged to work with Labour in Palestine and PSC, trade unions, and of course colleagues in Young Labour, to pass as official Labour policy a call for Labour representatives to stand on the right side of history, to support sanctions against Israel and acknowledge the crime of apartheid. And that vote was passed overwhelmingly. It was overwhelmingly supported by the Labour Party membership. Unions overwhelmingly supported that and continue to come out and stand in solidarity with Palestine. Across the country, we have seen protests over the years, hundreds of thousands of people standing with Palestine and with Palestinian people. But obviously that work is far from over, but it shows that there is support there, and it's time for us to mobilise. So we need to mobilise to hold those corporations like JCB and other corporations we've heard about today to account, to hold our elected representatives to account, and to build support in all of our communities to end that impunity with which this Israeli government is operating, and stand with Palestine, not just in words, but in actions as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jess. As always, very powerful words, and that call to accountability is one that all of us need to take up. And we've talked about a few different ways that people can do that, especially through our campaigns here at the PSC. The campaign focused on Barclays Bank, which supports the arms trade with Israel. And of course, we need to see everybody out on the lobby day on March 22nd, focused on our right to boycott. And of course, I want to see everybody here and so many more people on the streets on May 13th for the Nakba Day rally to show our support for Palestine in this country. Our last speaker of the night is going to be Ben Jamal, the director of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, who will wrap things up for us. Ben, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Rivka, and thank you to all of our speakers. And I want to return to what Mustafa and Jalal spoke about at the start, what the Boycott National Committee, in an analysis paper released today, has called the unprecedented challenges and opportunities presented by the election of this new far-right extremist Israeli government. And I want to talk about those in the context of our responsibilities as solidarity activists here in the UK. Now, we have seen, all of us, in recent weeks and months, the struggle of Israel's traditional allies in the West to sustain the narrative that has shielded Israel from accountability for decades, that it is a liberal democratic ally at worst overseeing a temporary military occupation. Some of you will have seen articles in the press in the last week from liberal Zionist figures like Margaret Hodge, stalwart of Labour Friends of Israel, and the historian Simon Sharma, declaiming their anxiety that it will no longer be possible to consider Israel to be a democratic state, whilst Netanyahu introduces profoundly anti-democratic measures, including those undermining the independence of Israel's judiciary. But the truth is, of course, that whilst these measures do indeed undermine the structure of democratic rights that have been in place to protect Israel's Jewish citizens, for Palestinians, including Palestinian citizens of the state, Israel has never been a democracy. The Supreme Court, whose independence Hodge and Sharma and those protesting on Israel's streets are eager to protect, is the same Supreme Court that has provided the endorsement for a whole body of laws that have enabled the theft of Palestinian land, the destruction of Palestinian homes, the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians for decades, and the expansion of settlements across the occupied territories. For Palestinians, this government, as we've heard, is a more extreme and more repressive version of the governments that came before. As the BNC put it in the paper it released today, this government is simultaneously a difference in kind for Jewish Israeli society in its assault on their democratic rights, but a difference in degree for Palestinians, while significant in terms of the extent of that degree of difference. Now, the UK government this week issued a statement alongside other European governments condemning the attack on settlers in Huwara, but in language that described it as a new, unprecedented act of indiscriminate violence. Now, indiscriminate means random, without careful judgment. And as Ronan said, what was notable about Huwara was the scale and brazen ferocity of this assault, which led many commentators in Israel itself to describe it as a pogrom. But it was not random, nor without careful judgment. It occurred as part of a systematic ramping up of an ongoing catalogue of such attacks over decades, allowed with impunity by the Israeli states. These settlers are now represented in government by figures like Smotrich, who will happily and openly endorse their actions, call for the utter erasure of Huwara village, with an implied sense of shame on his part that it has been left to settlers to undertake the work that belongs properly, in his view, to government. Now, Smotrich knows he has the backing of his Prime Minister, knows he is part of a coalition elected on a promise of continuing settlement expansion, ethnic cleansing, and de jure annexation of the West Bank, and knows, as we have heard, that his government has the space to pursue these policies because they anticipate that governments like the UK and the US will not move beyond this weak rhetorical condemnation. The opportunity before us is rooted in the fact that continued inaction on the premise of shared democratic values with Israel becomes harder, if not impossible, to sustain in the face of a government with ministers like Smotrich prepared to openly and nakedly articulate their violent racist agenda. And as Ronan reminded us, the shame in trying to sustain that position of inaction should be shared and owned not just by our current government, but by our Labour leadership. So the parameters of the response to the election of the new Israeli government need to be outlined and framed, as they have been tonight, by Palestinians who understand clearly the nature of the threat it poses. Their ask to us as solidarity activists is, as it has always been, to support their struggle for liberation by taking action to end the complicity of our government, our public bodies, and our companies and corporations, and an end to the policy of normalization with apartheid. This was the call reaffirmed in January of this year by the first anti-apartheid Palestinian National Conference involving the PLO, the BDS movement, and Palestinian civil society and human rights organizations. A conference which asked us to escalate our support for BDS and also to give full opposition to all repressive laws being introduced globally to suppress freedom of expression related to advocating for Palestinian rights and to target the BDS movement, including the UK government's impending anti-boycott law. So please add your energy to this struggle. If you're not a member of PSC, join us. Join our lobby of Parliament on March the 22nd, where we will be laying out the opposition of a broad coalition of more than 60 civil society organisations to the anti-boycott law, from the foundation of recognising this as an attack on the core democratic rights of all. Join our day of action against Barclays Bank on March the 25th and begin mobilising in your communities for our march to commemorate the ongoing Nakba on the May the 13th, where we again need to be on the streets of London in our tens of thousands. Let me say this in conclusion: the Palestinian people, as we have heard tonight, need our solidarity more than ever. Last summer, many of you joined us in your thousands as we demonstrated then in response to Israel's most recent attacks on Gaza and then on Nablus. And when I spoke at that rally, I quoted the Palestinian writer and activist Mariam Barghouti. Her words then resonate again today. Heartbreak, that is the mood of Palestine. Heartbreak and a deep yearning to stop having what little pieces of us survive keep being broken down until there is nothing left but dust. But the Palestinian people, in their heartbreak, as they get ready again to bury their children and mourn for their brothers and sisters in Jenin and in Nablus, refuse to succumb. As Mustafa reminded us, they will continue to resist. Our job, as always, is to stand strong with them and in their resistance and recommit ourselves to never stop rallying, never stop lobbying, never stop protesting, never stop boycotting until they enjoy what is their birthright: freedom, justice and equality in their historic homeland. Free, free Palestine.
Thank you very much, Ben, for that closing statement. I think everyone will agree it's been a very powerful evening to hear from all of this range of speakers, and there's really been a consensus across the room. Please join us in all of the events that Ben has described. They're in the chat here, and we'll also make sure that they're up on our Twitter account. Follow us on Twitter at PSC Updates to hear more about all of these opportunities to get involved. Now is the moment, if you're not already involved in the PSC and in our campaigns and all of the campaigns in support for Palestinian self-determination, now is the time to get involved and talk to your friends, talk to your family, bring everyone along too. It's more important now than ever. Thank you all for being here tonight. It's been great to see so many people ready to take action. Hopefully we're going to see all of you in the streets, in the halls of Parliament, in every place that we take action in the coming weeks and months. Thanks again to everybody, and thank you very much to our speakers.